Hello and welcome to IB Tutovids. I'm Durmaz, and this is the reasons for war with the Spanish. Now in 1898, there was strong tension between the United States, the Spanish, and Cuba. And there was debate on why we should go to war with the Spanish. Now there are 4 reasons why we ended up going to war. And the reasons I summed up in an acronym of MY-IB. Now, these are not in chronological order, but I'll explain why it's important to remember just what they are. It's a very short time in what it took for when the conflict started to when we went to war. So, first of all is M and MY, which is the USS Maine, the sinking of the USS Maine. Now, this is mainly considered by most U.S. history textbooks as the trigger for the Spanish-American War. The boat was sitting in the Havana harbor of Cuba, and it was sunken. And it was believed to be in Spanish. Journalists said it were the Spanish. It went there to fight the fight in Cuba because there was a fight between U.S. nationals and Spanish officials. And this was over yellow journalism, which is going to be our next topic. But this fight broke out because the Spanish said something about the Americans. The Americans, essentially fought them. And so this boat was sent down from Tampa Bay, actually, to settle the dispute, send more people in and calm it down. But the boat was sunk. Modern historians say that it wasn't sunk by the Spanish. It was actually sunk by Cuban revolutionaries who wanted to pin it on the Spanish so the United States can join and help the Cubans. Now, why is yellow journalism? And this is one of the most important reasons why we went to war. However, it's important to note that yellow journalism didn't necessarily affect politicians, but it affected the public view of going to war. Now, this specifically means the sensationalization, of the media and exaggerating the stories told to them by their journalists in other countries. So, for example, with Cuba, there was you'd hear stories of Spanish officials raping or killing or doing drastic things on ships and in harbors and in businesses that would make the public disgusted. So essentially there was this sensationalization war between Pulitzer and Hearst. You recognize the name Pulitzer probably as the very famous literary award, but he was a journalist and so was Hearst, and they believed they started this battle with who can sensationalize the most so more people can read the newspapers. And this really did spark a hatred in Spain. And this is really the press advocating for war. Now, not only did the press advocate for war, sometimes they'll sensationalize in the other way, or Cuban revolutionaries are doing bad things. So it wasn't only, this is very important to remember, and this might be a fact to mention. If there's a question on the IB exam in the History of America section on paper 3 that asks specifically about yellow journalism, it's very important to remember that not every single journalist advocated for war with Spain. In the West, for example, most of the journalists there were advocating against, and there weren't necessarily as drastic exaggerations as featured. Now, historians today say it did not affect a politician's point of view. That just because it was only the public, and the public didn't have much to say whether or not we go to war, because it was the Senate and it was the Congress that were voting for going to war. Most of them have already made up their mind whether or not they hate the Spanish, and it became more of a partisan thing. But it's one of the reasons that the United States were fine we're going to war. Where you see later on in history, Vietnam War, for example, the public hated going to war, which had a bad outcome for the war. Now, next is I, which is insult to McKinley. Now, this is one of the funniest examples. Essentially, it's name calling. Enrique Dupuy de Lome wrote wrote a letter to Jose Canalejas, which is the ambassador of he's a Spanish ambassador, and Enrique Dupuy was the leader in Cuba. And essentially he said that McKinley is weak and that he's getting involved in a big scene for no reason. He's a small guy in a big scene. Specifically, it said small time in a big arena. Obviously, this was in Spanish. Now, newspapers, in a way, sensationalize this as the largest insult in history, the biggest insult in history. They hate Americans and that kind of thing. Now, whether or not McKinley was insulted himself, the politicians felt that Spain did not believe the United States was a strong power. And at that time, concepts such as social Darwinism and manifest destiny, saying that the United States are superior, were so strong in the belief that to hear that they're inferior from Spanish is a cause of war and is a cause of a sentiment of disgust. Now, the last one is B, which stands for business interests. And so many had interests in Cuba. They had sugar farms and that kind of thing, sugar plantations in Cuba. And they're really the only ones that cared about going to war there. Now, the Cuban revolutionaries, and these are the people who wanted Cuba free from Spanish hands, were scorching American-owned land in Cuba to force America to be involved. Now, this sounds weird because we came on the side of these Cuban revolutionaries that were scorching our own land. But the point of it was to say, we're protesting the fact that you're not coming to help us because you're involved in this country. So essentially this is bad for business. You know, all your crops are burning up, you have no business there. And when that's the sole purpose of your business is, for example, sugar, you need to get involved. So there was a large push in Congress and Senate from these business people, from these lobbyists and whatnot, to get involved in fixing this problem. Spain said it won't touch American interests. It won't touch the businesses there, and they made a deal. But, however, the United States and business felt that they won't be compensated if there's a battle on sugar plantations, for example. They won't be compensated for what happens to them. So this was a reason to join in immediately and fight and get their businesses back in shape. Now to go over it again, this is my IB, which is Reasons for the War with the Spanish. It stands for the sinking of the USS Maine, yellow journalism, insult to McKinley, and business interests. Specifically, Maine, yellow journalism, insult to McKinley, and business interests. This is mainly used for IB History of the Americas. This is a lot of detail for example, AP US History or any US History course. But for IB, this could be a very common question, or it could be worded, what were the causes that, or to what extent did the causes of the Spanish-American War lead to the globalization of the United States? And so you'd know the causes, so you'd be able to talk about the causes, but you may have to apply them in the globalization factor. And but it's very important to know these nonetheless. And you'll find these in the late 19th century era of history of the United States on your paper 3. For more resources and for the document with this information, please visit my website, which is tutovids.weebly.com. For questions, you can email me at ibtutovids@gmail.com or post your question in the comments section. In the description is my website. Thank you and have a great day.